All right, welcome everyone to Northern Forest Conservation Delivery Network August talk. Um, we have today Steve Hagenbuch, who's going to talk about bird-friendly maple, and I'll provide a little background here, and then we'll get going. Steve Hagenbuch is a senior forest program manager with Audubon, Vermont. In this position, Steve advances his work with private landowners, including maple producers, municipalities, foresters, land managers, and other conservation partners to promote forest stewardship activities that will enhance the health and habitat value of forest land for priority bird species. A key component of his work is overseeing the continued development of the bird-friendly maple program in Vermont and throughout the country. When not in the woods on business, Steve can still be found there, hiking, mountain biking, fly fishing, backcountry skiing, or whatever else seems like fun. Steve, his wife Dana, and their two teenage children live in Waterbury Center, where they run Sweet Bird Farm, a small farm business that includes maple production. And so, with that, Steve, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Eric. And good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining here today. I'll just add a little bit more about me. So for some context, while my position title is that of a senior forest program manager, I'm a conservation biologist and I'm also a forester, licensed forester here in Vermont. And as Eric mentioned there in my bio, do maple production as well. So I kind of bring all of those lenses to Audubon's work here, and in particularly the bird-friendly maple program. And I'm excited to share with all of you today a little bit more about this program, particularly because it is something that is just getting started up in the upper Midwest, where many of you I know are coming from today. And so happy to kind of share this with you and perhaps look for potential opportunities in the future to engage more with you. So we really are, bird friendly maple is the tagline here. We're working together to integrate maple industry with global bird conservation. And I want to just start off before that we get into bird friendly maple a little bit more specifically, just a little context on the National Audubon Society. So Audubon Vermont is the Vermont state program of the National Audubon Society. And our mission is quite simple. It's to protect birds and the places they need today and tomorrow. And I highlight the places they need part of our mission because bird-friendly maple and a lot of our other healthy forest work that we do is really focused on that place, that being the forest, that our birds really need. And I'm going to be speaking most directly to Vermont today because that's where I'm based and that's where this program, Bird Friendly Maple, got started. But we're also going to talk about it in the context of expansion to other states, including the Upper Midwest as well. So this is just an image kind of showing really the landscape. If folks have never been to Vermont, this is a lot of what you would see if you came here. Roughly 78% of our state is in forest cover. And the rest of that then is open agricultural land. Our towns and cities are really quite small, but we definitely have those kind of dotting the landscape matrix as we were to fly over the state. But the majority of the state is in forest cover. And so as we think about the places that birds need here in Vermont, it really is the forest that a lot of our efforts are focused on. And I like to show this map to kind of highlight that we're kind of an important place when it comes to thinking about forest birds specifically and their conservation. Excuse me. And so this is a map showing some results of kind of a short period of time from the North American Breeding Bird Survey, which I'm sure many folks are familiar with. It's one of the longest running bird survey programs that we have in the country, going back to the 1960s. And this map is showing forest birds specifically, and kind of the richness, the number of species that we find or that are being encountered during different survey routes as part of the North American Breeding Bird Survey. So the warmer colors, the darker reds, really being the places where there is a higher number of forest birds compared to the places that are cooler colors, which are fewer numbers of birds. And so we can see quite easily here that the places where we find the majority of our forest birds, the high richness of species, are here in northern New England, New York, starting down through the mid-Atlantic, and then the upper Midwest as well, where many of you I know are coming from. Really is where we find some of that greatest richness of our forest specific bird species. So that's a really important thing to remember and try to visualize this map as I go forward to another map here in a slide, a couple of slides ahead. So those forests also not only provide important a breeding habitat for a high richness of bird species, they also do lots of other things for us, of course. And what we're going to focus on today is the maple production side of things. So Vermont, we kind of pride ourselves in leading the country every year as the number one maple producing state. So roughly 50% of all the maple syrup produced in the U.S. does come from the small state of Vermont. It's something that many, many people historically have engaged in here. It's a family thing. It gets people together during a otherwise kind of a time of year from winter transitioning into spring when it's kind of muddy. We have mud season, as we call it here, and that's sugaring season. And it brings everybody together to think about making this incredible non-timber forest crop that many, many people like to enjoy. And when we look at where in the country we find our maple production, this particular map is it's relatively recent, so it's from 2022. The darker colors again here, kind of the warmer colors are going to be the places where we have the highest amount of maple production, so in gallons of syrup produced. And then the lighter colors getting into places where maple is still produced, but not at the same volume that the darker colors would be. And if you look at the colors of these maps, of this map, and see where the majority of the maple syrup is produced, you might, if you remember back to the previous map, you might start to see some similarities. So right now, just to kind of give everybody a little bit of reference, Vermont is number one production in the country. New York historically and continues to come in as number two. But just this past year, there's been a switch between who is number three. It has been Maine for many years, but just this past season, 2025, Wisconsin actually leapfrogged from number four to number three in production. So it's Vermont, New York, Wisconsin, and Maine as the top four maple producing states in the country. So now we're going to go back and bring these two maps together, and we're going to see that pretty obvious, I think, to see that the same places that have some of the highest richness of bird species during the breeding season are also the same places where we find the majority of our maple production happening. And so this is really the initiation and the rationale behind why the Bird Friendly Maple Program was created. And I'll get into kind of the timeline for that here in just a little bit. But these two maps, I think, really kind of tell the story right up front about why we're doing this program and why it's an important thing for us to think about as we go throughout the country into new states. So when people do think about producing maple syrup, if they have any idea where maple syrup comes from, they might think about the forest, where those maple trees are, where sap is harvested from those trees during a very short period of the year, generally, again, late winter, moving into early spring. So in Vermont, that tends to be well, it can be all over the map. It really depends on when we have freeze thaw cycles happening, but traditionally it would have been late February through mid-April when the maple production season is happening. So those forests that we harvest our sap from to be processed and boiled down into maple syrup are called our sugar bushes. So this is an image of a sugar bush. This is actually my own personal sugar bush. You can see the green lines that are going tree to tree. So you may be familiar with a more traditional approach to sap collection, that being buckets that we would see hanging on trees. While there still are some people that use buckets as a way to harvest their sap, the majority of producers, especially those that are commercial producers, have advanced onto the tubing and the pipeline system that brings that sap right from the tree to a sap collection tank or to the sugar house where it will be boiled. So you don't have to go from tree to tree emptying sap out of those buckets anymore, like historically that would have been done. And so a lot of people think about our sugar bushes. This is what they might look like. It's sugaring season. There's probably still snow on the ground. And that's the image that folks have. But with bird friendly maple, what we're really trying to get people to also think about is sugar bushes when they look like this. So once the maple production season is over, leaf out happens sometime in May, we start to see our sugar bushes greening up, and that's when we really get into thinking about bird friendly maple season. So this image would be maple season. And this image would be bird-friendly maple season because this is going to be the time of year when our migratory songbirds are returning from their wintering grounds back into our forests and into our sugar bushes. Things like the scarlet tanager in the upper left there, the wood thrush on the right, and the black-throated blue warbler down there on the bottom left. Those are all bird species that can be found in nesting in our maple sugar bushes. Some work that we just have recently completed with the University of Vermont and the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, we were looking at what these bird communities are within our sugar bushes. And there have been a total of 72 different bird species found in sugar bushes during the summer breeding season. So really highlights the potential value that our maple sugar bushes and our maple industry then can contribute to that forest bird conservation. Unfortunately, however, as I'm sure many folks here know, a lot of our forest birds are in decline, or they are facing threats that could bring them into decline if they aren't already. And some recent data that came out 6 years ago now, back in 2019, from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and others, really highlighted the fact it was 2.9 billion birds lost was kind of the tagline of this news release, and highlighting the eastern forest birds part of that, which could also extend, I believe, to the upper Midwest. Roughly 17% decline in the populations of eastern forest birds since 1970. And just to give a little bit more of a point on that, if we think about our iconic wood thrush, which is a beautiful ethereal songbird that we have in our forests, 6 in 10 of those wood thrush have been lost since about 1970. So while we are a forest here in the northern forest region that hosts, that provides habitat, breeding habitat for such a rich diversity of bird species, a lot of those bird species are not doing quite so well in their populations. And so things that we can do to help support them, help to make sure that they're able to nest successfully and raise the next generation of their species are things that we think about through our particular efforts. So with all of that in mind, with the map that looked at where maple production happens in the US, looking at the richness of bird species and how those two really tie together very, very well, this is where the idea behind bird-friendly maple came from. So the idea itself actually was probably almost 15 years ago that I started thinking about this program, but it was about 10 years ago that we actually started to bring it to reality and to create this program. And we did that through a partnership with two particular groups. One is the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association, which is our trade association for the maple industry that does a lot of promotion around maple and provides educational opportunities for producers and gets the consumer base to understand what's so great about pure maple products. So they're an important partner with us in this effort here in Vermont, as well as the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. So our state agency that works with forests and with private landowners also work very closely with us as we develop this program here in Vermont. So there's really three components to the Bird Friendly Maple program that I want to highlight here today. The first one really is around education. So we want to educate both producers, maple producers, and consumers about the importance of healthy forests, and the importance of healthy forest to maple production, to birds, and how together as a maple producer and a consumer of maple products, you can be a partner with us in our forest bird conservation efforts. We also provide technical assistance to maple producers. So those folks that raise their hand and are interested in knowing what can they do to help integrate bird habitat considerations into the management of their sugar bushes. We will actually go into the forest doing some assessment and inventory of the conditions that are there and provide management recommendations on how to improve those conditions moving forward with birds in mind. Excuse me. And last but not least, and I think this is really kind of the unique part of the Bird Friendly Maple program, is that we want to be able to recognize those maple producers who are kind of taking the extra step and being very intentional in their efforts to incorporate bird habitat considerations into the management of their sugar bushes. So when folks, maple producers, enroll in the Bird Friendly Maple program and agree to manage their sugar bush with birds in mind, we give them unique labeling and other marketing opportunities to tell that story to their consumers, to their customers. And so here's just an image of one of our earliest producers in the program, the Vermont Maple Farm. Here they are at a local farmers market where they sell some of their products, and they've got the Bird Friendly Maple sign that they have right there on display. They have labels. We'll get to this a little bit further in the presentation, labels that they have on their containers. And so So as a customer comes there and was looking around at potentially purchasing those products, they can see that sign, they can see that sticker of the scarlet tanager and wondered, hey, what's this all about? Strike up a conversation with the producers and learn that these producers are being very intentional about thinking about birds in the management of their sugar bush. So this is a form of what we call market-based conservation. So, a lot of landowners will do things just out of their own goodwill to manage their forest, steward their forest in ways that support birds and bird habitat. But we're hoping through programs like Bird Friendly Maple that the folks that are enrolled in the program, those producers are actually getting a market benefit to that. So in places like Vermont, where everybody has a producer down the road, everybody knows a person that they can get their syrup from locally. Our grocery store shelves have maple syrup from lots of different producers. So anything that kind of stands out in that marketplace, like the sticker with the scarlet tanager on it, we hope brings new customers to purchasing products from those producers directly. So what does this all mean? What is bird-friendly maple? When we hear that title, what does it actually imply? Isn't all maple syrup friendly to birds because it's a forest product? We hear that question a lot. And I will say right now, I'm going to reiterate it at the end. Yes, maple production inherently is good for birds because one of the greatest threats to any of our forest bird species would be the loss of habitat when that forest is converted to some other use and no longer meets the needs of those birds. So if someone's making maple syrup, they're going to keep that forest as forest, and that's awesome, and that's really great. But then the way we steward those forests, the way we manage those forests, those sugar bushes, makes them either just a place where a bird might find forest cover, but it might not have all the specific habitat elements that these different individual birds that we're thinking about are looking for. And we're going to meet some of those birds here in just a little bit. So what does it mean? Beyond just, yes, we have forest, what is it that we would be looking for within the sugar bush that would make it just an okay place for birds? Not just an okay place for birds, but an exceptional place for birds where we hope they're able to nest successfully and fledge that next generation of their species. So I'm going to show a couple different images. I might go back and forth between them because we're going to try to compare and contrast what we're seeing in these images to tell us the story about what bird-friendly maple is. So this first one that we're looking at right now, this is a historical generational sugar bush. The family that runs this sugar bush has been, I think, 5 generations have been involved in various places of the property in maple production over time. It looks aesthetically, I think it looks pretty nice, pretty pretty. It's got those ferns covering the ground, and you see basically nothing but maple trees all over the place in that forest. So it kind of looks nice. But my question to all of you to think about is, does this look like a very bird-friendly type of sugar bush? And as you think about that, I want you to compare it now to these next 2 images that we're going to look at. So these are not going to be we can kind of look at these together, and I think what we'll see is that on the left, there's a tree right there in the foreground. That is not a maple tree. That's an American beech tree. On the right, we can see there's actually some softwood in there, some balsam fir, some red spruce that's in the mix as well. And so we're basically seeing that there's more than just maple trees in these 2 images relative to the previous image, which really just showed that there are maple trees. So again, I can't really see folks and maybe ask the question about which one is more bird friendly, but I'm going to give you just a moment to think about it. Is this the more bird friendly kind of forest and sugar bush, or is this the more bird friendly sugar bush? And if you happen to say this one, think about it a little bit more. And if you happen to say this one, then you would be correct. So these 2 images really show what we think about when we think about a bird-friendly sugar bush. And that is because there's more than just maple trees here. And that's one of the taglines that we have come up with for the program, is to think about more than maple. Why, from a bird standpoint, would we want to think about more than maple? Well, one of the first ones is our poster bird, if you will, for the program, which is the scarlet tanager. Some of the research that has come out of the Hubbard Brook in New Hampshire has indicated that many of our insect-eating songbirds, which is really pretty much all of them when they're here in our forests, if they have the opportunity to forage on trees other than maple tree for those insects, they will do that. So maple tend to be underutilized for foraging, whereas other trees like yellow birch and oaks, if they're present in the forest, birds are going to more likely go to those to look for their insects. And we don't know exactly why, although we do know oaks host a much more diverse insect community, so that could be part of it with yellow birch as well. But if we just have maple trees in our forest, we may not be finding that the birds that are looking for insects in this forest are finding what they're looking for and may avoid those places a little bit more. We also, with those softwood trees that we have on the right side there, that gives us the opportunity to bring in some birds that in a pure hardwood forest or a pure maple forest may not be there. And in the case here that we're seeing is a Blackburnian warbler. And we don't need a lot of softwood trees. We don't need a lot of fir or spruce or pine for the Blackburnian warbler to show up. We might just have one or two that are up high in the canopy, and that's enough to bring this bird in. So we are looking for a diversity of tree species. Ideally, at least 25% of our sugar bush is something other than maple. And we do that using a common forestry term called basal area. So when we do our inventory and assessment, we're going to be trying to figure out what is the composition of a forest. If it's more than 75% sugar maple, we'd be providing some management recommendations on how to diversify that forest over time. If it's already greater than 25% non-sugar maple, we'd be just talking about ways to help maintain that over time. So what else does it mean besides more than maple? So here's another image of a sugar bush. You can see this one's actually quite younger. Those trees are a bit smaller than the images that we've seen thus far. But again, just kind of get this into your mind. Enjoy the beauty of a forest here in this picture. But let's compare this to these two and see if we can come up with some of the differences between these two images and this one over here. You can see this photo actually does have some diversity. There's a paper birch back there, and there's some other species in there too. So we're moving away from the tree species diversity part of this and into something else. And which one is probably more bird friendly? If you're thinking this one, you would be correct. And really what we're looking at here is that we have a layer cake, we'll call it, of vegetation. So if we go back to the previous slide, basically all we see here are what are making up the canopy. Those trees in the canopy, pretty much a single age class of trees in this forest. If you look down towards the forest floor, it's just open understory. There's really no vegetation, growing young vegetation coming in there. If we look at these two images, we can see that they're actually different layers of vegetation. So on the left, pretty much everything you're seeing under that main line, which is the bigger tube and the lateral lines that come into it, is hobblebush, and that's one of our native shrubs that we find in some of our forests here in Vermont. I know that you do up in the upper Midwest as well. This is an outstanding representation of the understory layer of a forest. So everything, woody stem plants that are everything from ground to about 5 or 6 feet tall, we define as the understory. And so we like to see at least patches of well-defined understory in our forest. And then if we look to the right side, we see that there's some understory as well. Looks like some nice sugar maple regeneration that's coming in there. But then behind that, you can see that there are trees that are really filling in the next layer of the forest in our layer cake, and those being what we would call the mid-story. So if the understory is everything from ground level to head height, 5 or 6 feet, the mid-story is everything from 5 or 6 feet to about 30 feet in height, or generally halfway up through the forest canopy. And the reason that we want to see the layer cake effect of vegetation here is because each of those different layers will support different bird species. On the left, with all that hobblebush, we are more likely to have this bird, the black-throated blue warbler, finding good opportunities for nesting and for foraging for insects within that layer. That's pretty much exclusively where it will build its nest, is within the first 5 or 6 feet of the ground. And then on the right, as we get into that mid-story, that's where birds like our wood thrush that nest somewhere between 6 and 30 feet generally are going to be looking to build their nests too. So we want to have more than just kind of this park-like image of big trees overhead and nothing else. We want that layering, what we call that vertical structure in our forest, to provide these different habitat nesting layers and foraging layers for our birds. Dead wood is good wood is another thing that we talk a lot about. So in sugar bushes, standing dead trees or snags, right, as we call them, cavity trees, trees that can be dead or can be alive and have cavities in them that might have been created by a bird, a primate excavator, or they could have formed naturally. Those are all things that we're looking for. In sugar bushes, it's not necessarily something that a lot of producers want to have a lot of, these standing dead trees. Like on the left there, that was actually that snag and all those cavities that you see in it. That's in my sugar bush. That was something that I took a lot of pictures of. I love that tree. Folks probably are familiar with the bird that made the holes there, and that would be the pileated woodpecker. Those are feeding cavities that the pileated woodpecker excavated as it knew that there was a good food source for it within there. And I loved having that. But you can see the lateral lines, the sap lines underneath there. One of the reasons that maple producers don't always like a lot of snags in their forests is because every standing dead tree becomes down woody material on the forest floor. And in fact, what you're seeing here is that same tree that did snap off and come down, and it did land on my lateral line there and requires extra work then to repair that, to remove the tree from there. To me, it's part of doing business. If I'm going to be in maple production, I'm working within a system where these things happen, and that's just part of the deal. But for other folks, though, it's not always a desirable thing to see a lot of standing deadwood out there in the forest. If we weren't talking about a sugar bush and we were just giving forest management recommendations, we'd be encouraging people to think about maintaining or recruiting at least 6 standing dead trees or snags per acre. In our sugar bushes, we know that that's a pretty high number. Maple producers tend to be in their woods a lot more frequently than a lot of other landowners. And so having these standing dead trees everywhere is also potentially a safety concern. So we reduced the number of snags we ask people to manage for in the bird friendly maple program to make it a little bit more manageable. Right now, we're asking for an average of 2 snags or more per acre that are at least 10 inches in diameter at DBH, diameter at breast height. And so by having that at least is giving some consideration to the value of snags without asking producers to have an excessive amount that are going to cause problems or potentially cause problems down the line. On the right is just another example of some of that coarse woody material that was right on the edge of the tubing in a sugar bush. That's an extremely large log. We just want to always see more deadwood on the ground. Our metrics for knowing how much deadwood on the ground really is not that great. The literature doesn't really suggest a lot of things. We're kind of moving into thinking now about using some of the guidance that's out there on managing for old forest conditions. And as we refine our standards for the Bird from the Maple program, we're looking at what some of that guidance might be and see if we can bring that in. Right now, we're only asking for folks to have at least 4 large coarse woody material logs on the forest floor per acre. And that may be changing here in the near future as we look to some of the newer guidance that's out there. So for the coarse woody material on the forest floor, one of the most common values from a bird standpoint that folks might be familiar with is that they provide drumming sites for ruffed grouse. And we actually have here a video, and I know Jacob Crawford from Audubon Upper Mississippi River Program is joining us here today. And Jacob, you'll recognize this because Jacob's from Vermont originally and has worked with us here in Vermont, and took this video of this ruffed grouse a couple years ago, and I just absolutely love it. It was the only time that I had ever seen this happen. Let's see if I can get it to play. Nope, I could not get it to play. Let me try it again. There we go. So pretty cool, and those large logs on the forest floor are really a key feature for ruffed grouse to be able to do that display, that drumming display. Of course, when we roll those logs over, we also find things like redback salamanders, insects and spiders and other invertebrates that are all bird food for those birds that forage on the forest floor, like ovenbirds and thrushes. And so we just like to see that messiness, right? Large logs on the ground, brush piles on the ground, all of that stuff that visually might not look that great to some people is a really important ecological part of the forest and something we encourage our maple producers to think about providing when they're managing their sugar bush. So something that we want to say yes to is having our sugar bush be composed of native plant species, which means we want to say no to having these introduced or non-native and invasive plants in our forests. Here are examples of two of the introduced species that we commonly find in our forests in Vermont and in our sugar bushes. On the left, Japanese barberry, and on the right is the honeysuckle. These are, like many of our introduced plants, they can be very prolific fruit producers. And as birds are moving through the summer here and starting to get ready for fall migration, they will start to add a lot more fruit to their diet. And if they're finding places where there's a prolific amount of these non-native fruits for them, they will eat them, but they're really not leaving here then in the same level of fitness as they start their migration as if they were feeding on the native plants, the berries of the native plants. And also, the non-native plants really just don't host the same diversity of insects as the native plants do. So as birds are, even earlier in the season when they are first getting back here for migration, and as they're raising their young and looking for insects, having just invasives everywhere is not going to provide that same insect load that's super critical for those birds to be able to be successful. So we want to be able to understand that we have these non-native plants in our sugar bush and think about ways that we can work to control them to minimize their future impacts and decrease their spread to other areas. So beyond thinking about, benefits of managing our sugar bushes with birds in mind to just birds, we also like to talk to producers about the other benefits, perhaps even to their business and to their ability to make maple syrup well into the future. Not every producer that has enrolled in the program here in Vermont is really all that interested in the bird part of it. But what they are interested in is having a forest that is healthy and sustainable into the future for them to do their production. So we like to talk, as we better understand what our producers' motivations are, we try to talk to them in those terms to help them understand how managing with birds in mind can help them meet their goals. So on the forest health side of things, one of the things that we've known through some research at the University of Vermont is that when we diversify the species, the tree species in our sugar bushes, it does reduce the impact of sugar maple related insects and disease. And on the left, you'll see an image. This is from a sugar maple borer. So a native insect, though, that really targets maple trees, especially if there's an overabundance, if they're heavily stocked forest of smaller diameter maple trees, that insect can really become quite impactful. On the right is the Utapella canker, so a fungus that gets into the trees, and you basically create what is often described as this cobra head effect. You can see the wood is decaying there. And just like the sugar maple borer, when you have high stocking of maple, that fungus, those spores will spread and they'll start to impact more of our maples. So whenever we find that we have trees that are showing evidence of sugar maple borer and Utapella canker, we will often recommend folks to remove those from their forest, even if those are trees that they're currently tapping. Having a maple tree, tapping a maple tree, does not necessarily mean that it's producing a lot of sap for you. In fact, the tree on the right with that Utapella canker, it's possible if that tree has tubing as its sap collection method, and that tubing is under a mechanical vacuum, which many of the tubing systems are these days. If there's air getting into through that tree because of the decay that's happening there, that's going to impact the vacuum level and reduce the amount of sap that's being harvested from that tree. So we do ask people and tell them that it will behoove them at sometimes to actually cut a maple tree. And that can be a hard conversation with a maple producer who is thinking, I want to have as many maple trees as possible to get sap from. But just because you have a lot of maple trees doesn't mean they're all giving you the same amount of sap. And so taking some out and having trees that are more vigorous, larger crowns, and larger diameter trees is actually going to get you probably the same equivalent sap as if you had two trees that were of lower vigor and lower quality. Some other benefits that we know of that come from managing our sugar bushes with birds in mind: climate resilience, mitigation. So, right, climate resilience is something that a lot of forest landowners are familiar with today. They're hearing a lot about it. Our forests are constantly under threats. Many of them are exasperated by climate change. And so thinking about management techniques to make our forests more resilient, better able to respond to the threats that they're facing is something a lot of folks are interested in doing. On the mitigation side, the ability of trees to sequester and hold carbon in them is something that a lot of people are also starting to think about. So we've known through some of our work in the past on forest birds and working with groups like the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, which does a lot of climate resilience work and carbon work, that some of the same strategies for enhancing habitat are the same exact strategies that are being talked about for climate resilience and climate mitigation. So in this example, we're looking at a sugar bush that was just in development before they set up the tubing, and they actually did some small canopy gap creation. As you can see, the gap in the canopy there to try to stimulate a new age class that create that understory, that regeneration of the forest. And those are some of the things that, from the climate and carbon aspects, are often described and talked about. And of course, we know from bird habitat, getting that regeneration, that understory growth is going to benefit birds like our black-throated blue warbler to come in. So these are all different ways that we can talk to producers about getting them to think about managing for birds, even if birds aren't primarily one of their top goals. So that's really what bird-friendly maple is. And now we're going to spend a little time understanding what is it that we would ask producers do to kind of enroll within the program. And when I say enroll, we're basically getting to that point where these producers can then be recognized for their efforts and be able to label their products, have the signage and other communication tools available to them to tell that story to their customers. So the first thing that we would do, someone calls up, sometimes they'll say, "Hey, how do I get those stickers on my maple?" Sometimes they'll say, "Hey, I heard about bird friendly maple. What's that all about? How do I get involved?" The first step really is for us to go out and get into the forest, into the sugar bush, many times with that producer. And we do an inventory and assessment. The inventory side of things really would be similar to what a forester would do if they were doing an inventory for creating a forest management plan. So we may do that work if there is not already a forest management plan in place for the sugar bush. We would do that inventory work. If there is a forest management plan in place, most of that information is going to already be have been collected and be in that. So we kind of skip that typical forest inventory stuff, and we go directly to the habitat assessment. And here you can see some images of that's a producer on the left, Jed's Maple. That's Steve Wheeler at Jed's Maple, one of our early adopters of the program as well, up in northern Vermont, and then Matt Davis at Little Hogback Farm there in the center with me doing the assessment. And the result of that assessment is a report that comes back to the producer, and it basically outlines everything that we found in our assessment, in our inventory, and provides those management recommendations. If the producer agrees to follow through with recommendations that are provided, they sign off on a last page there, which is a signature page, and then we recognize them as a bird-friendly maple producer. You'll note that I am intentionally not using the word certify them as a bird-friendly maple producer because at this point in time, we do not consider this a true certification program. The reason being that for it to be a certification, we really need a third entity, third party who would come in and basically provide that certification for us or validate that people are following through with what they said they would do. Right now, it's Audubon and the producer, so we're calling it recognition, but we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in the presentation. So in addition to having conditions on the ground, things like that diversity, more than maple, layer cake of vegetation, deadwood, and thinking about the non-native plants, the condition of the woods is really important. We want to see the sugar bushes today be as bird friendly as possible, although it's not necessary for a sugar bush to have all of the things we're looking for now in order to enroll in the program because we realize that not all forests are going to have those conditions currently. But as long as people are thinking about moving the forest in that direction, to have more than maple, to have that layer cake of vegetation, to be looking at deadwood, standing and on the ground, to think about non-native invasive plants, we can recognize them for their efforts moving forward. And so part of that is to have written documentation of what those folks plan on doing. So historically, we have always required folks to have a forest management plan written by a forester to help provide that management guidance with input from the assessments that we provide them with. What we found, though, as we've moved the program outside of Vermont to other states, is that forest management plans aren't always necessarily as commonly developed for maple producers. So we've come up with another option, which is called a habitat management plan. And this is something that's very specific to the sugar bush. So if that landowner has more acreage than just the tapped woods that they're harvesting sap from, A forest management plan would address the entire property. The habitat management plan that we would do would just look at the tapped woods, the area that are identified areas that are identified as sugar bush, and that can be written by a forester or other natural resource professional, or even by Audubon staff. Those habitat management plans. But regardless of whether it's a forest management plan or a habitat management plan, we really want to see written documentation of intention moving forward. What is it that people are going to do into the future that to meet their goals of being bird friendly? Active forest management is really important to that end, and we want to see that listed so that folks are moving things in the right direction. So once all of that happens, we've done our assessment, we have a habitat or forest management plan in place. People are signing off to agree to manage with birds in mind. We recognize those producers as being bird friendly. Then we give them these opportunities for telling that story. So here's just a few of our producers with their signs, happy to have it. Some people put it up at their sugar house, or if they do have a retail place, they would put it there, or as you saw earlier, at a farmer's market, or wherever it might be, just to kind of start to tell that story to their consumers, to other visitors that come. We do have here in Vermont and other places in New England, pretty traditional thing called sugar on snow parties that happen during the sugaring season. I won't explain exactly what sugar on snow is, but just note that it involves maple syrup that's boiled longer than maple syrup. It involves some snow or shaved ice. It involves a donut and a pickle. I'll leave you with that, and you can research and see what else it's all about. So it brings those sugar on snow parties bring a lot of people to sugar houses, to places where maple is being produced. And so having this sign there really is something that sparks a lot of conversation and gets people really curious about what it's all about. And that's what we want to have happening. In addition to the sign, we give folks the labels, as you'll see here. So here's our produced and bird-friendly habitats, again with the scarlet tanager. On the left from Little Hogback Farm, they've really kind of taken this to the next level. They actually have each of their different maple products, they put a different forest bird on it. So their syrup has the scarlet tanager imprinted right on there, as well as you can see on the left side of the screen there. It also does have the bird friendly sticker that they put right into the logo or into their custom label. And they do maple cream, which has, I think, a black-throated green warbler. They do maple sugar, which I think has an ovenbird on it. So they're really trying to tell that story, wildcrafted from a bird-friendly forest. Like this is really valuable for helping to get consumers to understand what this program is and why it's really important, and why buying products from bird-friendly producers is a good thing. All right, so as we are kind of now moving forward, as mentioned, this program is 10 years old in Vermont, started in really 2015 was the first that we were out in the woods with producers. Um, we are now seeing that this program has expanded to a variety of other states. And so I wanted to just kind of show you the current states as of kind of the beginning of this year. Vermont, and the number next to the states, if there is a number, is where that state ranks in maple production. So relative to the map again there on the left. Vermont number one, New York. So Audubon New York has been running this program for a number of years. They're number two in production. Audubon Connecticut is part of Audubon New York, so they kind of have been working together. Even though they're number 10 in production, they still do make maple syrup, and they have a program there. Maine, which had been number three, but as I mentioned, in 2025, dropped down the list to number four, and then Massachusetts as well. And New York and Vermont are really the states where it's been the most widely adopted thus far. And some of these other states, we have fewer producers, but more and more people are starting to become aware of it. Since the beginning of this year, though, we now are expanding into other states. So Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Wisconsin, again, number three in production after being number four for many years. And so Jacob, who's on this call, and Dale are involved in that effort. Jacob's actually the one out in the woods meeting with producers to help enroll them in the program. So I'd encourage folks to, if you're interested in more specific to that part of the country, to be reaching out to Dale and or Jacob or Tom Presby, who's not on the call today, but with Audubon Great Lakes. And then we've also had some interest from Ohio, Indiana, and West Virginia. So if there's any folks here from any of those states as well, do know that folks within Maple or within the bird conservation community in your states have also reached out with some interest. So we'll see where that goes in those particular places. But it's really exciting to see the interest and expansion that's happened with this program. So other things that we're right now looking at is that third-party certification, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago. So third party, we're looking at it as a true certification. We're going to look at it in kind of two different approaches. One would be if someone was had to be organically certified to begin with, they could then do a bird-friendly maple add-on to that certification. So here in Vermont, we have Vermont Organic Farmers and the Northeast Organic Farming Association. We're going to be piloting an approach with them here over the next 2 years to see how that could work and whether producers are interested in that approach. But again, it requires being organically certified first, like John Buck, as we see here in this image, who is both organic and bird friendly right now. The other thing we're going to be looking at is having bird friendly maple be its a standalone, just a certification, additional certification all by itself. And we would do that through an entity called the Food Alliance, which folks may be familiar. You may have heard about Audubon's conservation ranching certification, which looks at beef and grass-fed beef. The Food Alliance is the third party for that certification, and so we're exploring maple as another alternative for that certification as well. And we'll see at the after another 2 years whether or not it makes sense to go that route, or if we just keep it as the recognition as it is right now. And then one other thing that we're really looking at, and this is exciting because the social side, the human side, I'd like to think really that conservation is all about people. And yet to date here with Bird Friendly Maple, we haven't really thought so much about the people side of things. We're trying to be getting people to manage their sugar bushes certain ways and really thinking about the birds that are in there. But we need the human side of this to be understood as well. So we are partnering right now with Virginia Tech. The DARE Human Dimensions Lab at Virginia Tech, which does social evaluation of different conservation programs. And we're really looking at consumer and producer motivations and barriers for engaging in programs like Bird Friendly Maple. So they've already been in Vermont, they've been in New York interviewing our current Bird Friendly Maple producers to better understand what got them interested, what would help it be a better program for them. And we're looking forward to getting those results back. Now they're moving into doing some work around consumers and understanding consumers' interests and how could we better message this program to get the consumer base to really buy into it. So super excited to see the results of that. And then something that we just finished up, again, going back to Vermont Organic Farmers, we had an opportunity to partner with them over a couple years to create really what we think is one of the few, if only, sugar bush biodiversity best practices guides that are out there. And we created the guide that you see here. It's called More Than Syrup, Supporting Biodiversity in Your Sugar Bush. And it brings a lot of the things that we've already talked about from a bird specific standpoint, but it really spreads it out over just thinking biodiversity more broadly. And this is going to be available to all maple producers to have with them to better understand what can they be doing, what can they be looking for in their woods to show that they're on the right track for supporting biodiversity and moving things forward there. So really excited to be able to have this publication available for folks. And as I stated a little bit towards the beginning of the program here, and I told you I would reiterate it once again, just because somebody doesn't have the bird friendly label on their maple product does not mean that they're doing things bad for birds. In fact, I'm just going to repeat it. Sugar bushes are inherently good for birds because they keep the forest as forest. Sugar bushes that are managed with birds in mind are even better because taking that extra intention to make sure that all of these attributes that we've talked about are being thought about and integrated into the management. So with that, that's all I have for you here today. If you are interested in reaching out and getting more information, you can start with me since I have my contact info right here, as well as the Audubon Vermont Bird Friendly Maple website. You can see that as well on the screen. And we can get you information for Dale and Tom and Jacob as well there in the upper Midwest if you're interested in the more specifics to your part of the world there. So thanks everybody. I'm happy to take any questions that might be out there that folks have.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's awesome. It sounds like an awesome program. And yeah, Jacob and Dale put their contact information for people in Minnesota and
Okay.
Wisconsin. They're looking to uh, get some more information on the program. And so yeah, reach out to them. They have their contact information in the chat.
Great.
I think let's see. I'm seeing and Steve, you can see the chat.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah, we can see it
David
now.
David from PA has a question about that program.
All right, let me just run down here. Who is running the bird-friendly maple program in Pennsylvania? So, Audubon Mid-Atlantic, which covers both Pennsylvania and Maryland, and Scott Parkhill is the senior forest program manager there. So it would be Scott dot Parkhill, Parkhill at audubon.org would be his email address. And Pennsylvania is a little bit slower. We've just started to have some conversations. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning, in Vermont, we worked with partners as we developed this program, and we're looking to do the same thing as we go to Minnesota and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So we've already had some conversations with both the Minnesota and Wisconsin maple syrup producers associations, and kind of gotten them interested in helping us to get this spread the word about it. And so we've met with folks in with the Pennsylvania Maple Syrup Council as well, just to start that conversation, but hasn't really moved much further than that right now. Let's see. Is that the only question on here? I think it was.
I guess I had a question, Steve.
Yep.
In terms of, is there a spot where you have a list of all the producers that are, you know, uh, bird, not certified, but bird, authorized and stuff?
Recognized,
Yep.
recognized. Yeah,
Is
yeah,
there
yep.
a spot on Audubon that has that information, or would it be reaching out to your state entity for that?
So right now it's really reaching out, looking at the individual state, Audubon state program website. So for Audubon Vermont, if you go to that vt.audubon.org/maple, you'll see a link to click on participating producers. And that'll list everybody currently who is enrolled in the program. There is a story map on that website as well, which actually has a map of Vermont, and we have some, but not definitely not all of the producers up on there with some additional information and photos. But we're actually working right now with folks at National Audubon to upgrade this and have it be where it's not just state by state, but actually there will be one Bird Flame Maple web page for the whole country, and then you can kind of click on the map and you see a map of the whole country, and every producer would be on there, so that no matter where you are, you can easily find folks. But that's in design right now, and will really be rolling out over the next couple of years.
Okay. Maybe I'll have Jamie in the follow-up email to everyone, include that, at least the Vermont one, so that they have a jumping off point, um,
Great.
for so everyone kind of has access to it.
Great.
Any other questions? I probably speak for everyone in saying that a sugar on snow party sounds pretty awesome. Pickles and donuts. I mean, sign me
Well,
up.
yeah. Yeah, well, since we have just a couple extra minutes here, and if there aren't questions, I'll give you a little bit more on the sugar on snow thing. So, sugar on maple syrup is when we boil sap to a temperature of 219 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the it gets to the right density to be maple syrup. But to do sugar on snow, you boil it a little bit more, gets a little bit thicker, and then you drizzle it over a bed of traditionally snow. But in today's world, we don't really use snow anymore. We use shaved ice, and what it becomes is like taffy. So you kind of peel it off the ice, and then you chew on it and
Oh,
pull out your fillings if you have any, because it's very sticky. But it's fun, it's delicious. And then the pickle part, historically, sugar makers would often have a jar of pickles in the sugar house, because if you've ever been in a sugar house where the steam is just there settling over you for hours and hours at a time as you're boiling, it's like a sugar high almost. So they would eat a pickle to kind of cut the sweetness. So when you have the pickle with the sugar on snow, it helps cut the sweetness, and it actually tastes pretty darn good together. And the donut is just there as kind of an extra thing. Raised donuts have always been the traditional type of donut for that as well. So, but it's a very New England. I think they do it in Quebec as well. But I know outside of New England, people kind of raise their eyebrows when you say sugar on snow and a pickle. But
yeah.
it's a good thing
Might
if you
be
get the chance.
yeah,
Don't pass it up.
might be a Midwest tradition we have to start here up in Wisconsin for sure.
There you go.
Any other questions for Steve? All right. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and so thanks again, Steve, for taking time to chat about the Maple
My
program
pleasure.
from
Thanks
Vermont.
for the
And
invitation. Thanks for the invitation to do so. Really great to share it with all of you. Thank you.
all right.
Great. Take care, everyone.